Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. I'm doing fine myself. Welcome to my recent reads. Today I'm going to talk to you about the following books. Villette by Charlotte Brontë, The Seven Madmen by Roberto Alt, Jiyoung Born in 1982 by Cho Nam-ju, The Kreutzer Sonata by Leo Tolstoy, Death in Venice by Thomas Mann, The World of Yesterday by Stefan Zweig, Identidad Canaria by Antonio José Farrugia de la Rosa, A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James, Ducks, Newburyport by Lucy Ellman, and The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. Let's start with the first book, Villette by Charlotte Brontë. This is a Victorian novel. I read it as part of Victober, which, in case you don't know, it's a month-long readathon of Victorian novels that happens every October. And I know that we're way into November, but that's how long it took me to read it. I'm a huge fan of Jane Eyre, so I've always wanted to read something else by Charlotte Brontë. I decided to pick up Villette. It just sounded like the right thing to do, and I do not regret it. I do not regret it, even though I did not enjoy it as much as I enjoy Jane Eyre. But I enjoy Jane Eyre a lot, so yeah, that's, I don't know what that tells you. But Villette relies a lot on coincidences, so does Jane Eyre. Really, that didn't bother me. Jane Eyre, however, has a coherent plot, so it has a plot that makes sense, and you don't know how it's gonna end, but you can see how Charlotte Brontë takes you along very skillfully through everything that happens to poor Jane Eyre until the very end. Lucy Snow is the main character in Villette. Villette is the name of the Belgium village where she lives for most of the novel, although not at the beginning. And this novel really is a fish out of water story. Why? Because Lucy is an English girl, very much an English girl, who is transplanted into this Belgium village. So she has to deal, and she in fact struggles throughout the novel till the very end with two things that make her the other. Although actually, I think because this is an English novel, she others the other characters, which is kind of problematic, but there you go. And the two things that she struggles with are Catholicism and the French language. And you think, girl, if you couldn't speak French, why did you move into a French region of Belgium? And also, if you think that Catholics are so terrible, why did you move into a Catholic country? Those two questions I don't understand, and I don't know what was going through Charlotte Bronte's head. We'll never know. In Jane Eyre, she goes to lengths to criticize Frenchness in the character of Adele, who's the little girl that Jane Eyre is supposed to take care of, and that's how she meets not Heathcliff, or what's his name now, Mr. Rochester. And you know, in Jane Eyre, Charlotte Brontë goes to all kinds of lengths to explain how stupid and crazy and different French people are compared to English people and people in England, it's what I meant to say. So, you know, there's a lot more of that here, and not that I'm gonna, you know, uphold myself as the defender of all things French, but I'm a little bit tired of xenophobia, and I don't enjoy reading a book where the main character criticizes other people. And it's, although it's interesting because she is the one that could suffer xenophobia, I guess, because she is the foreign character in a foreign land, but because we are told everything from her point of view, and because she's so very English, and she makes a point of stating how English and how Protestant she is, and how much she struggles to understand other people, that, you know, we see her as she's the main voice, even though she's there. So yeah, it's I have all kinds of complicated feelings about this novel, but ultimately I am glad I read it, and I would recommend it if you like Victorian novels, if you like the Brontes, if you want to read something about that period, and not about that period, that's not what I meant to say, by a Charlotte Brontë, by a Bronte sister, specifically by Charlotte Brontë. Oh my god, I don't know what's wrong with me. Let's hope that I can be a little bit more coherent in my next book. And that's gonna be a challenge, because my next book, I've just checked, is The Seven Madmen, which is an Argentinian novel published, or rather written by Roberto Alt. an Argentinian writer. So this novel was originally published in Argentina in Spanish. So The Seven Madmen is the title in English, but the original Spanish is Los Siete Locos. So it's The Seven Madmen is just a little translation of that. It's really a critique of the social mores of Argentinian society in the 1930s, at the beginning of the 1930s. So it has a lot of interesting things. If you're not Argentinian, I am not Argentinian, and if you're not Argentinian, then there's probably a bit less to get from this novel. I still enjoy the way it was written. I can't really vouch for translations because I read it in Spanish. Yeah, I thought it was interesting, it was fascinating. It's hailed as a classic, as a modern classic in Argentinian literature. Roberto Alt belongs to the generation right before Jorge Luis Borges, who, as you probably know, is the Argentinian writer, the best known Argentinian writer, and he's an idol, cultural icon, not just in Argentina, not just in the Spanish-speaking world, but in universal literature. But in Argentina he's a god. So there was an Argentinian literature before Borges, and if you want to find out what that read like, you could do a lot worse than to read The Seven Madmen. The next book that I have for you is Kim Jiyoung Born in 1982, written by Cho Nam-ju. So this is a Korean novel. The writer is from South Korea. It's available in English. I don't know, well, it's been translated into English. It's a novel from, I believe, let me see, it's not that recent. It's just recently come out in Spanish. Yeah, it's from 2016, but it just only now came out in Spanish translation. So some of you might have already read it in English. This, I mean, I love the cover of this book. I hope it doesn't get a lot of glare here. So this novel is a page turner. It's also very short. I read it over just one single day. I read a few hours in the morning and then a few hours in the afternoon, and by evening time I had finished. Now, I did struggle with one thing about this novel, and that was the style. When I was going through it, I had the feeling that I was reading notes rather than a novel. So the notes for a novel rather than a fully formed novel. And I wasn't sure if the clunkiness was due to the translation, because of course I haven't read the original Korean. And mostly there's a reason for that, which is I can't read Korean or speak it. But then at the very end of the book, the novel itself, the book itself explains why it's written in that way. And I'm not going to say anything else, because that would be a massive spoiler. But you should read this novel if you want to find out. And it's a feminist tale. It's about women's life and the condition of being a woman in Korea, mostly during the 90s and the early 2000s. It's full of information that I didn't know, but I'm glad. And I didn't know that I wanted to know it, but I'm glad now I've known it. It's a good book. I don't know if I'll ever read anything else by her. I don't think there's anything else available in Spanish. I'm not sure about English, but if you've read this book, I'd be curious to know what you thought about it. And now I want to talk to you about two short stories, actually short novels, two novellas that I'm reading as part of Novellas November. I recently published a video in which I talk about 3 novellas that I wanted to read this month as part of Novellas November. And then I went ahead and read 2 of them really quickly because they're very short and they're very good. So the first one that I want to talk to you about is the Kreutzer Sonata by Leo Tolstoy. So this is a Russian novella and it belongs to the late period in Tolstoy's artistic life. So it's very different from Anna Karenina and I'm assuming War and Peace because I haven't read War and Peace yet. I will get to it. But I thought it might be a good idea to get through some of his shorter fiction first. I really like the Kreutzer Sonata. It's a journey on a train. The passengers are talking about marriages, what makes a good marriage, what doesn't, whether sex. I mean, they talk in very coded ways, okay? This is a 19th century novel, but they talk about whether sex is important or not, whether it's even natural to be married to the same person or to be monogamous in a monogamous relationship with the same person for many decades. And then along comes a passenger who says, hey, wait a minute, I have a story, I have something to add to that, you know? I was married once and I murdered my wife. And he proceeds to tell them, and therefore us, the story of how he got so jealous that he killed his wife. So this is no spoiler because the character tells you, but I'm just not going to talk about why or how he killed his wife and kind of what the ending to that was. The ending is not the death, well, the murder of his wife. I thought it was a great device to have the passengers on a train talking about marriage. I thought the introduction was fantastic. And yeah, it metaphorically blew my mind. And whether you've read Leo Tolstoy or not, if you're looking for an excellent short book to read, a book that you can read over a day or a couple of days, or maybe this weekend, you could do a lot, but a lot worse than the Kreutzer Sonata by Leo Tolstoy. And the other novella that I read also has death, but not necessarily a murder. I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm talking about Death in Venice by the German writer Thomas Mann. So the style is very different. So it's a short book, but it's a lot denser. The prose, Thomas Mann's prose, is very dense, it's very wordy. I read this in English translation. I cannot imagine how hard this might be to read in German, because I have the feeling it would actually be more difficult in German than it already is in English. It's a novel that I don't want to talk too much about because I feel like I need to reread it. That's how dense the prose is. And because it's a novella, I breeze through it. It's so short that I breeze through it. And I feel like I must have missed out on a lot of details. So I'm going to go back, but I'm going to read a different translation. I'm going to read a Spanish translation this time around. And then if I come up with more coherent or more interesting things to say about it, I will make another video. But suffice it to say for now that the novel, it's about a middle-aged, older really, writer, German writer, fictionalized writer, okay, an alter ego of Thomas Mann, and he is facing writer's block. He's lost his mojo, he can't write anymore, so he decides to go on a trip to see if he can get his inspiration back. So he goes to Venice, or he ends up in Venice, and there he falls in love with a Polish teenager, a Polish teenager, yeah, a Polish boy, that's what I'm trying to say. Teen boy, is that a term? Teenager, male teenager called Tazio, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. I'm not really spoiling anything, that's really the setup. Yeah, I need to go back to it, but if you've read this story or anything else by Thomas Mann, please let me know in the comment section down below, because he's a writer that I want to know more about and I want to read more of his books, but I feel like I know nothing about his books, so, or you know, his works. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. And then I read another book originally written in German, but it's totally different. I'm talking about The World of Yesterday by Stefan Zweig. So this book in German is entitled Die Welt von gestern, which is, so The World of Yesterday is just a literal translation. I read it in Spanish translation, but this book has been translated into so many languages. So in case you don't know, Stefan Zweig was a best-selling author in the 1920s, 1930s. He was from Austria. He belonged to the Jewish bourgeoisie. He was very well connected intellectually with other artists, not only from his native Austria, but also from France, obviously neighboring Germany and Italy. In this book, he talks about how the world changed between his youth, which took place in the late 19th century, until he was exiled to Brazil after fleeing Vienna for London. But then when Britain declared war on Germany, he was considered an enemy there, so he had to go to Brazil, where he eventually killed himself. So this book is not a barrel of laughs, but it's so beautifully written. It's so full of interesting facts about European history before World War I, during World War I, between the wars, and a little bit about the beginning of World War II. Because, like I said, he killed himself in 1942, so he never actually saw the end of the war. It's also, to me, it was the first book that I read by Stefan Zweig, so it was wonderful to become acquainted with his prose. I loved it. It's a nonfiction book, so I read it as part of Nonfiction November, and I recommend it to everyone. When people ask me in my personal life for recommendations, I always struggle a little bit because I need to know the person and I need to know what they read and what has spoken to them before I can recommend a book. But this one I'll blankly recommend to everyone. And yeah, I could go on and on and on, and I could possibly make a 3-hour-long video just talking about this book, but I won't. If you've read it, or if you have any questions about it, if you want to know more about it, let me know in the comment section down below. One of the reasons I enjoyed this book so much is because I buddy read it with someone who's so smart and had so many insights on the book, and she also had read other works by Zweig before, so this was a hugely enriching experience for me, as I hope it was for her, and I would be eternally grateful. So my buddy reader for this, you might know her, is Amelia. She doesn't have a YouTube channel, she doesn't make video content about books, but she's a regular commenter in lots of, I don't know, lots of, but in a few booktube channels, including my own. So you might have seen her name popping up on my channel or other people's channel. But she does have an Instagram presence. She is a bookstagrammer. So I'm gonna link to her Instagram account in the description box. So if you want to see and keep up with the books that she's buying and reading and posting about on Instagram, just head to the description box and click on the link. So the next book that I want to talk about is Identidad Canaria by A. José Farrugia de la Rosa. This is also part of Nonfiction November for me. This is a Spanish language book. It's not available in translation, but bear with me, I'll try to explain what it's about. It's not really a book, I mean it is a book, but it wasn't written, it wasn't conceived as a book. So José Farrugia de la Rosa, the author, is an archaeologist and a historian who specializes in the indigenous peoples of the Canary Islands. And when I say indigenous peoples, they're not around us anymore, but most people, or at least an important percentage of people who live in the Canary Islands to this day, have some indigenous ancestry at least. So they inhabited the islands for thousands of years before Europeans came here, and the islands were conquered gradually over a number of years in the late 15th century. The island of Tenerife, which is where I'm from and where I'm making this video, was the last one to be conquered, and that happened in 1496. 1496, so that's after the so-called discovery of America, okay? To put things into context. So of course, the indigenous people, or the indigenous peoples of the Canary Islands, or indigenous people really, because they all had a common origin in Northern Africa, were not extinguished. They were kind of incorporated into the new Creole society in the Canary Islands under the Castile crown. Some of them were sold as slaves in Spain. It's a fascinating story. You can find out about it. If you don't speak Spanish, you won't find out about it from this book, but there are lots of resources out there, so go seek it out if you're interested. So yeah, this is not really a book. It wasn't conceived as a book. It's just a collection of everything this author has ever written about the indigenous people. So in this book you have some reviews that he's written. There are interviews that, not interviews that he's done, but interviews that he's done with people. So he's interviewed other people. There are a few academic profiles here about archaeologists from the past. There are quite a few of his academic papers, but they're all quite short and accessible. The book is really accessible. It can be a little bit repetitive because it's just a collection of everything he's ever written, and of course he repeats some of the sources, and I don't think you were ever supposed to read everything he's ever written in one tome. However, I'm glad that this book exists, because this was this would have been the only opportunity I had to read a lot of what is published here, although some of the articles that are contained in this book were published in the press locally, but I think having this in book format is already worth its money. I also have this book signed by the author. There you go. I don't know if you can see his signature there. I met him at the Tenerife Book Fair in May this year. And those were all the books that I've been that I've actually read recently, but now I want to tell you about some of the books I'm in the middle of reading and a book that I'm about to begin, I hope, this weekend. So I've been reading A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. This book, this novel, came out in 2014 and it won the Booker Prize, which then I believe was still the Mann Booker Prize. And I'm reading this as part of my Booker Through the Decades project. So in my Booker Through the Decades project, I read all the novels that have ever won the Booker Prize, but I do so by decade. And I decided to start with the current decade. So I started with a book which won in 2010. I'm on the book which won in 2014. It's taken me a while to make my way through the decade because of several reasons. One of them is that I also read a lot of other stuff, and but a big reason really is that some of the books are chunkers. So it takes me a while to get through them, particularly because some of these books, most of them so far, are not books that I would have picked up if I weren't doing this project, which is why I'm doing this project in the first place. And this is one of them. I'm really struggling with it, but you know, I'm gonna soldier on because I'm really committed to this project. I know that some people follow it, and if you want to follow it, you know, you're still in time because I'm nowhere near the middle point of A Brief History of Seven Killings. So if you want to read along, read along, let me know, and you know, we can keep talking about it here on my channel in the comment section down below. And then the other book that I'm reading that I started a few days ago is Ducks Newburyport. And this book is so heavy and so big that, you know, even though I spent many hours already reading it, I've only made it to here. Okay, so yeah, but I really like it. I'm really enjoying this so far. I know that that's probably meaningless because I've only read this much. That's this much, not this much. So yeah, I don't know, what can I say? I can't say anything about it. I'm reading it. I'm enjoying it. I don't struggle with the voice of the narrator. I'm into it, but I have to be in the mood. And because I've been reading a lot of other things that I wanted to finish, plus the 2 novellas that I read already this week, I haven't had time. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I haven't had time to go back to this, but I'm hoping to go back to this on the weekend. And yeah, I'll be charting my progress on my channel, so stay tuned and I will let you know how I get along with this chunker. But I also want to make room this weekend for The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. This was longlisted for the Booker Prize this year, 2019, and it's a very short book. Deborah Levy, it's an author that a lot of people love, but I haven't read anything by her, so I'm hoping I'd like this, because if I do, I'm ready to go back and read Hot Milk and all her backlist. But I don't know anything about this book. Well, I know a little bit about the plot, and this is gonna be a buddy read with Sean the Book Maniac. And yeah, we're supposed to start reading this on the weekend, so I'll let you know how I feel about it. I don't have much to say about it yet. So those were my recent reads. Let me know what books you've been reading recently, what books you're about to start. Of course, if you've read any of the books that I've talked about or something else by the authors that I mentioned in this video, let me know in the comment section down below. That's where the action happens. I look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye bye.